This is the September Swing Left Peninsula General Meeting. We meet every third Tuesday of the month at 5 p.m. Pacific. I'm going to walk you through our agenda quickly. First of all, coming in October is Louisa Boyarsky, who's with the Virginia Grassroots Coalition, and she'll be here especially to direct us to the most important things to do in Virginia as we approach Election Day there. To start off the meeting, I want to share some good news, and then we'll give you our usual actions update in the states and voter registration, letter writing. We'll have a quick announcement about Dan Pfeiffer. And our special guest today is Chelsey Davidson, who's the policy counsel at Take Back the Court Foundation. And the court we're talking about is, of course, the Supreme Court. Let's go over some good news that unless you get your information from a sort of wide variety of sources that aren't mainstream media, you just don't hear. So you all remember that leading into the 2022 midterms, the narrative was Dems doomed, red wave is coming, blah, blah, blah. And that Simon Rosenberg and Tom Bonnier and a few others looked at other data that showed that most likely what was going to happen was a close competitive election. And that included 5 House special elections. It included the Kansas referendum on abortion rights, also our voter registration numbers. So non-polling data, right, they looked at. So let's just talk about what those same sorts of metrics are showing us in 2023. First of all, we won the Wisconsin Supreme Court seat in a blowout, 56% in a state that, usually elections are won or lost by less than a percentage point. We've taken away 2 heavily Republican cities, Colorado Springs, Colorado, and Jacksonville, Florida. We just got to 57% in the Ohio ballot referendum in August. And in 23 special elections this year, according to a daily costs chart that they made, the Democrats have outperformed 2020 by an average of 8 points. That's 2020. So we're up 8 points from our 2020 performance. And from 538, they have another way of looking at some of the specials. In 38 special elections, we've outperformed the partisan lean of the district by 10 points. So what that means is if the partisan lean is, let's say, 17 points Republican, the Democrat only lost by 7 points. Or if the partisan lean is, 30% Democrat, the Democrat won by 40 points. That's like an earthquake kind of number, a 10% outperformance by Democrats. This is not stuff you see covered in the regular press, and it's the same stuff that wasn't covered leading up to 2022. So pay attention to this outperformance that we're already experiencing. It tells us that we're doing the right thing. And if we keep working hard, we can have the kind of election that we want to have. Okay. And actually, I think we're going to put in the chat now some places for you to follow some of this kind of good news. So there's a link to a brief article that Simon Rosenberg wrote that goes over all the stuff that I just mentioned if you want to get into the detail. He's also a great person to follow. Jessica Craven writes a newsletter called Chop Wood, Carry Water that's also chock full of good news. And I think it's really important to feed yourself with good news because you're not going to get it from mainstream news sources. Okay, so next up is Bruce, and he's going to talk about phone banking.
I've been around doing this stuff now for 5 or 6 years. And what I found is when I ask friends or acquaintances if they'll make calls on a phone bank, they pretty much say, I'm not comfortable doing that. And the truth is, I wasn't either. It really brings my insecurities right to the surface. I feel like, man, what if I'm interrupting someone's dinner? What if they hang up on me? Maybe it's going to be a waste of my time. What if someone yells at me? Maybe I won't know what to say and I'll just start stammering. Truth is, that stuff does happen, and it's all happened to me. I've made mistakes, and after I've ended a call, I've thought, "Oh, I know what I should have said." But what I've also learned is none of that does matter. What really matters is that we win these elections. And I've become a phone bank regular, and this is what I've learned. One thing is I've had important conversations. A couple months ago, a woman answered the phone I was calling into the Central Valley, and I just started off. I said, how are you doing? And she said, well, if I tell you, I'm going to start crying. I said, why? What's going on? And she told me she had to pick her grandson up that morning because there was a shooting threat at his school. And basically all I did was I listened, and I was truly sympathetic because I really believe that no child, no adult should have to experience the fear and terror that happens then, has long-term ramifications. So I listened for a while and then made a gentle comment that I hope she's planning to support Democrats in the next election year. And she said, yes, she would. Also, around the same time, I had another call. I spoke with a woman, and she just exuberantly said, oh, yeah, I voted. I'm making sure my whole family votes, and I'm making sure everyone in my church votes. And I said, wow, I'm surprised I haven't heard from you. I just felt so good after that conversation. It was really a gift to me. I found people appreciate the information. I can have a conversation. They say, well, thank you. I'd really appreciate the time. Thank you for what you're doing. Another skill I've developed, which honestly I really kind of like doing now, is when someone's being a little bit vague, I like to listen for an opening. I'm developing the skill of using open-ended questions to guide someone to making a good decision. I had a conversation recently with it was over the summer, I think, with a pro-life Democrat in Ohio when we were making calls about their Proposition 1. And she was torn about how to vote. She said, I'm a Democrat and I'm pro-life. So I helped her think that decision through by really asking what her concerns were and giving her honest information about that particular election, and telling her that I understood her dilemma, which I did. And she decided to vote with progressives on that. So that was a great victory. I found that when I join a weekly phone bank, which I do, I'm now on 2 phone banks every week, I get tied in with other activists, and it's a good experience, and I get to know them to some extent, and vice versa. Also, when I make calls, every number that's disconnected, everyone we identify who is a Democratic voter, that's really important information for going into the later stages of the election cycle, because then you can have much more effective phone banks. And then honestly, getting hung up on thickens my skin. And I've got some stories to tell. I've got hung up on a lot. Occasionally someone's rude to me, so what? I just click next call and move on. So we're going to be mentioning specific phone banks in the next few minutes. So please sign up for one or more of those. I think we're putting a couple of links in the chat right now. If you're nervous about making calls, go ahead, sign up for one of these. Human-to-human contact is really important. It's one of the keys to victory. And all these phone banks have training at the beginning. There's one-on-one support available. The links that are going in now, one's for Wednesday phone banks. I'm on that, and I provide tech support for people who need it. And then a Sunday one that goes into North Carolina, and I join that one to make calls. So you can click those links for details and to sign up, and you'll hear about a few more as we go through this meeting. So thank you, everyone. And that's it on phone banks for me.
Thanks, Bruce. And the phone banks are always looking for more people. So I appreciate your testimony about how you got into it. I used to think I did refereeing for soccer for a long time, and I thought people were just born as referees. I didn't really think about it. And then I realized I could train and do it, even though I never played youth soccer or anything. And phone banking's the same way. It's nobody's like, you don't have a phone banking gene. You get skilled at it over time. Okay, Virginia. Everyone knows that the entire legislature in Virginia is up for re-election in November. Under new maps, their redistricting was delayed, so all the maps are a little different than they've ever been. So there's a lot of uncertainty. The organizers in Virginia are really pushing this idea of voting on day one. And there's a big early voting period in Virginia, 45 days. So the first day of voting is September 22nd. We're going to share in the chat a Vote on Day One Virginia video that explains why early voting, especially on day one, is so important. And the reason is because those voters take their names off the voter rolls, and you don't have to contact them. They've already voted. So the campaigns can work on the voters further down in the list, and that's what drives up turnout really through the roof. So there's a big focus in getting people to vote early in Virginia. And toward that end, Sister District Project is having phone banks to Virginia every single day. And the purpose is twofold. One, encourage people to vote now, right away. And also you identify undecided voters for the campaign so that the campaigns have a lot of time to lobby those people before the last day of voting on November 7th. So there are links to those Sister District phone banks in the chat. And next up, there's an update on Ohio from Judith.
Hey, hi. I can't thank you enough for being here tonight. We need your people power. The November 7th Ohio election is so important. We defeated the effort to make state constitution initiatives harder to put on the ballot. Now we need to make certain people vote yes to make issue number 1 part of the Ohio Constitution to protect reproductive rights. So callers are reporting that some people think that the amendment already passed, even though it was just it was a totally different issue, but they think they've already voted on this. And then other people are reporting that the people they speak to are confused. They voted no before. Aren't they supposed to vote no this time? They aren't. They're supposed to vote yes. A yes vote supports amending the Ohio Constitution to establish a state constitutional right to make and carry out one's own reproductive decisions, including decisions about abortion, contraception, fertility treatment, miscarriage care, and continuing pregnancy, and to allow the state to restrict abortion after fetal viability, except when it's necessary to protect the pregnant patient's life or health. So I hope you feel inspired after this to sign up and make calls. We really need your help. There are a couple ways you can call. The Bay Area Coalition, as Bruce had mentioned, is having phone banks on Wednesdays, and starting October 11th, we will be adding Ohio to the Virginia and California calls. And there's also in-person Pelosi headquarters in San Francisco. Both of these phone banks are running on Wednesdays from 2:30 to 4:30, and Bruce is putting the links in chat for you. The Ohio Democratic Party is also having phone banks on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2:30 to 4:30. So if you've never made these calls before, we have a training session. And as Bruce said, the experience you have making these calls is an experience that can't be repeated, and it is really worthwhile. So next, we are going to go to the, it's Wisconsin. So off we go to Wisconsin.
So Justice Janet Protasewicz was elected last spring in a blowout and flipped the Wisconsin State Supreme Court basically from conservative majority to a liberal or progressive majority. And now Republicans want to impeach her for just almost made up reason. And if the Republicans do that, even if she's eventually acquitted, their state Supreme Court will be deadlocked for months. And that means that their current heavily gerrymandered districts would stand, their current abortion ban would stand. There's a lot of other important cases that would just stand. All this progressive change would stop. And it's a profoundly corrupt plan, and it's one that could spread to other states. They were going to do this a few weeks ago, and there has been a huge public outcry in Wisconsin, which basically made them delay action. And the next time that they may decide to go ahead, it's going to be in a few weeks, which will be in mid-October. And they hope that in the meantime, the public outcry dies down so that these Republicans can do it quietly. There's a lot of grassroots organizations that are fighting back hard now by forcing Republican legislators in the state to talk about something they do not want to talk about. Honestly, the business wing of the Republican Party is worried that if the Republican legislators go ahead and do this, there's going to be huge
keep slipping off.
Can everyone please mute themselves if you're not muted? Sorry, Bruce.
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you. Anyway, so the business wing people in the Republican Party are worried about the potential blowback, which could be disastrous for them. So we need Wisconsin Democrats to call. Sorry, let me rephrase this. The Wisconsin Democratic Party needs us to call voters in Wisconsin and make sure that, one, they know what's going on, and two, that they call their state legislators. It's very important that Wisconsin residents call their state legislators. So we're calling into Wisconsin and asking them to call their legislators and just up the noise level, keep the noise going. So links presumably for that are going in the chat. If not, I'll put one in a minute. And
They're already in there, Bruce.
Oh, thank you. I know. Anyway, so there's a phone bank this Thursday, and then this coming weekend there's a phone bank. So if you click the links, that's what that's about. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. Bruce and I were on a call where Ben Wickler, who's the chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, was on. And honestly, this sounds very doable. Ben was sort of said, just keep making noise. So hopefully you can help us with that. Judith's going to give a quick update on California voter registration.
Happy Voter Registration Day, everybody. I hope you checked your own personal voter registration to make sure everything's up to date. We have been working hard in the California Central Valley. Since March, we've registered more than 800 voters, and I'm happy to say the vast majority have been Democrats. We also held 3 voter registration drives today to celebrate National Voter Registration Day. So voter registration can make all the difference in the world, especially in close races like Adam Gray's in CD 13 was last year. Voter registration and then voter turnout. So while most of our voter registration drives currently are occurring on college campuses, we are going to hold a voter registration canvassing event on Saturday, October 7th. We're going to head to Modesto, which is about an hour and a half drive from here, to knock on doors and register voters, as well as discuss what issues are important to them. There's going to be carpooling available. And we have training. We're going to be doing a training by Zoom the Thursday before the event. And we will also have a short training once you arrive at the staging site. So these races in the Central Valley are must-win races if we want to strengthen our democracy, and we really need your help. We leave at 8 a.m. and we're back by 5 p.m. And you get to do so much good for 8 hours. So Bruce is putting the link in chat, and I really, really hope that we see you in Modesto.
Thanks, Judith. I'm going to give an update on letters. Swing Left Peninsula is known for its letters program, and we're branching out into different kinds of letters. So I want to give a quick update on our Ohio voter registration letters. This is a partnership with the Civic Center. We're sending scannable QR codes to parents of high schoolers in Ohio to encourage them to pre-register or register to vote. And we've been sending these letters for about 4 or 5 weeks, and the website traffic from Ohio is way up. So we don't have the registration numbers yet because that's a lagging, they have to get data from the Secretary of State's office, but early indications are really good that this works. These are also, the letters are followed up with a text reminder. So we're trying to reach the young people more ways that they're used to. we've written about 7,000, sorry, there are still 2,500 addresses to adopt. You can pick up all the supplies in San Carlos, or if you're not local, we will email you the part of it, and then we send you the QR code stickers through the US mail. So there's a link if you want to sign up to write some letters in the chat. The other kind of letters we're doing now, of course, are get out the vote letters to Virginia. Vote Forward has two kinds of campaigns, political and then issues related. We are printing for the political campaigns, and we will do that until those letters are exhausted. And then we'll print for issues related campaigns. Vote Forward's also added QR codes to its letters. So they're getting on the tech bandwagon. There are in-person parties coming up. There's a weekly Zoom party run by Mary Bevins. I think she's actually on the call today. Mary's added hundreds and hundreds of new letter writers from these. She's been doing these weekly meetings for years. So thank you, Mary. You can also pick up free pre-printed letters for Virginia from one of our 5 pickup locations. And again, you can use the link in the chat to find that. And now, Judith, can you tell us about Dan Pfeiffer?
Absolutely. And last but not least, our beloved Dan Pfeiffer of Pod Save America is going to be joining us on October 12th at 5 p.m. So we all know what's going to happen in 2024. The media space is going to be filled with lies, deep fakes, and all manner of disinformation as the presidential election gathers steam. So what can we do about it? It's pretty scary, really. So this is going to be a masterclass in messaging. So Laura will be sharing what she's been working on regarding messaging. And then Dan, who was the communications director of the Obama White House, will also let us know his response to messaging in this environment. So I hope you can join us. It's at 5 p.m. on October 12th, which is a Thursday. And Bruce is putting the link in chat for you. Thank you.
And now I'm going to introduce our speaker. And I want you to bear in mind what I said at the beginning about good news and how well Democrats are doing in the special election so far in 2023, and what an important indicator that is of how the election could go well for us in 2024 if we keep doing the work. And keep in mind that if we have a big election, then everything that Chelsey Davidson from Take Back the Court Foundation is talking about today with us will become possible. Okay, we're not very far away from being able to control enough of Washington that we can make the ideas that she's talking about happen. And the first time I heard of Take Back the Court Foundation, we were not nearly as close as we are now. So let's just keep that in mind. So Chelsey Davidson is the policy counsel from Take Back the Court Foundation. She's local. She graduated from Stanford Law School. She has a background in electoral legal work and environmental work. And Chelsey, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really sorry about the technical stuff, but please take it away.
No worries at all. I'm excited to be able to talk to you all, and just really, really excited to be here and to hear all of the other great work that you all are doing. Take Back the Court, and I'll just really quickly, for legal reasons, say that I'm here for with Take Back the Court Action Fund today, so I can talk to you about the Judiciary Act. Take Back the Court is the only organization primarily dedicated to expanding and rebalancing the Supreme Court. And the reason that we exist and the reason we want to do that is to strengthen American democracy and to preserve the fundamental freedoms for all Americans that the Supreme Court has been systematically shredding. So when Take Back the Court was founded around 5 years ago now, court expansion really wasn't on the map. It wasn't even obscure. And it essentially had no support from policymakers or advocacy organizations. And it was pretty much never talked about by anyone. We all grew up with this idea that the number 9 was some magic number and it should never be touched. And that was the end of the discussion. But court expansion has always had one really, really important thing going for it. And that is the fact that it is the only Supreme Court reform, literally the only one, that can immediately, upon implementation, rebalance the court that has been dominated by the Republican Party for more than 50 consecutive years. There are other proposed reforms that are really good ideas that solve other important issues, and we support several of those. But only expansion would reliably end this vice grip that the Republican Party has on the Supreme Court and that the political minority in this country has on the Supreme Court. So because of that simple truth, and because of the work that we and other organizations have done, support for expanding and rebalancing the court has grown dramatically in just the last few years. And the way that we do that is through sort of a three-pronged approach for different audiences. We impact change through the media, through organizations, and through Congress. So some of the most influential policymakers in Congress, from Senator Elizabeth Warren to House Judiciary Committee ranking member Jerry Nadler, have sponsored legislation. So we have legislation now to expand the Supreme Court by 4 seats. That's the Judiciary Act. We have 55% of the Congressional Progressive Caucus supporting court expansion, and more than half of the House Judiciary Democrats supporting expansion. We do really important work besides Congress is meeting with various organizations to get them to be vocal about expansion. Major institutions like Planned Parenthood, NARAL, the League of Conservation Voters, Greenpeace, Color of Change, the union SEIU have all announced their support for expansion. And in total, we have more than 130 organizations now vocal supporters of Supreme Court expansion. Media victories have included New York Times coverage of our docket study showing how the Supreme Court pretty much only grants cert now on cases that can move the country to the right. Data showing that John Roberts isn't a moderate, surprise, and op-eds. One that I had the pleasure of writing just this summer focused on how the Supreme Court has been negatively impacting the lives of young people across the country. And another very vocal supporter of court expansion in the media and communications space is coincidentally Dan Pfeiffer, one of our board members who will be joining you next week.
That's great.
So Take Back the Court was founded by a man named Aaron Belkin, who spent his whole life doing LGBTQ related advocacy. And he realized that his life's work was basically on the line because of the Supreme Court. Aaron has since retired, but we are very, very excited to have Sarah Lipton-Lubet take over the helm. And Sarah is amazing. She spent her career working in the reproductive rights space for the National Partnership for Women and Families. And likewise, she saw the existential threat posed to reproductive rights by the Supreme Court and decided to step into the court expansion realm. On the flip side, this is my first job post-law school. And I want to just sort of talk to you about why I'm so passionate about this issue and why someone who went into law school with a completely different plan for herself decided that this was where I needed to be and why I spend my days working on court expansion. So my contact with the Supreme Court began junior year of college when I had the immense privilege of actually meeting Justice Sotomayor in person and getting to talk to her, ask her questions. My left shoulder touched hers. I've never washed it since, all those great things. And it was right around the time that Scalia died. I didn't know it then, but the seat that Scalia vacated was about to be stolen by Republicans and Senator Mitch McConnell in just a few short months. They broke all norms by refusing to even hold a hearing for Merrick Garland, Obama's nominee. And they actually basically shrunk the size of the Supreme Court to 8 seats for more than a year. And they did it through illegal means. They did not go through the regular legislative process in order to do that. My senior year was even more devastating. That was the year that Donald Trump won the 2016 election. My 1L year, my first year at Stanford Law School, I remember within the first month, Brett Kavanaugh was having his confirmation hearings and people were testifying about his sexual assault history. And I remember sitting in class with my laptop open, taking notes on one side and watching the hearing on silent in the other corner, and just being absolutely devastated because I don't know if there are any other lawyers on this call, but a lot of criminal law is taught through really, really difficult stories about gender-based violence, these cases that revolve around gender-based violence. And I remember going to the bathroom after class, and several of my classmates were in the stalls crying because of the combination of the hearings and the context in which we were learning about how often people get away with gender-based violence, and how having someone like him sit on the highest court of the law, what it said about our justice system overall. In 2020, I actually took a different path in life. I took a year off of law school to work for a Stanford professor who is one of the top election lawyers and experts in the country. My job was running original research for him and also making sure polling places stayed open throughout the country. And it was an immense privilege. I was working my butt off, but it was an incredible experience. And I remember I was still working for him when the insurrection took place. So between all of those things, I realized that my original, goals for myself to become an environmental lawyer just weren't going to cut it when you have this sort of radical Supreme Court gutting all areas of democracy, of all the issues that I cared about. And so I decided that my first job out of law school was going to be working on court expansion, working on court reform, and I found my role at Take Back the Court. And 10 days after I started my full-time job, Dobbs was decided. So from senior year of college to just finishing law school by 10 days, we went from electing Trump, which was unthinkable, to reversing Roe versus Wade, which was deemed unthinkable at the time as well. And it's been, very humbling as a young person to watch all of these things happen. And it's also been very humbled to get to be one of the people who stands up and said, this is really, really disturbing. We need to do something about it. And here's what we do. However, as grateful as I am to get to be an advocate for court expansion, there is frankly no greater advocate for court expansion than the Supreme Court itself. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I'm not going to be able to go in case by case, but I want to touch on just a couple of key issue areas where they have done some of their dirtiest work in the past few years. So starting with abortion rights, everyone on this call is probably extremely familiar with Dobbs and with the threats to other rights that are pretty thinly veiled in Dobbs, including the right to marry who you love, have private adult relationships with whoever you choose, the right to interracial marriage, the right to birth control, all of these things that were hinged on privacy rights. They can say whatever they want, that, this doesn't go past abortion. But when you say that there's no right to privacy in the Constitution, you're inviting challenges to these other things. On the concrete issue of abortion, the Supreme Court is very, very likely this term to take up a case related to the FDA approval of mifepristone, which is an abortion medication that is used in, I think, around 50% of abortions nationwide. That number is growing now that other forms of abortion are less available. And it's a safe drug. It's been proved a million times over and over and over. Not only would this throw into question FDA approval process, but it would also mean that if they decide the case like we expect that they might, that mifepristone becomes banned in all 50 states. And 2 years ago, they were talking about, we're just here for states' rights. Obviously that's not their goal. It really is the control of the bodies of people who are able to be pregnant, the advancement of women, and, LGBTQ and other rights. In the future, they might also take up cases related to the right to travel, and those are extremely scary to me. Now, in the voting rights space, even if we just ignore campaign finance and Bush versus Gore and just focus on the last 10 years of voting rights sort of cases, you see a 10-year, nearly uninterrupted pattern of gutting the Voting Rights Act, of making it more difficult to vote, and upholding really restrictive voting practices across the country. Last term, they essentially heard one of the big cases, a gerrymandering case, Merrill versus Milligan, and they essentially decided it by saying, bring me a better case, bring me another case to talk through, who gets to vote, how we want to gerrymander. But of course, even though it was labeled a victory in that case, they only decided the right way after leaving those illegal maps in place for the entire 2022 midterms. the expected impact of those decisions, which were shadow docket decisions, is 7 to 10 seats in the House. And if you're counting, Republicans have this many seat majority. That's the difference. Flipping 5 seats would have flipped the entire House. So essentially, we watched the Supreme Court in Bush versus Gore steal the presidency, and we watched them steal the House of Representatives just last year. And so this term, they are going to decide a case, a South Carolina gerrymandering case, that is essentially going to boil down to, can the Supreme Court block racial gerrymandering claims in federal court? It would basically potentially end the ability to bring any gerrymandering claims in federal court, because the Supreme Court has already decided that partisan gerrymandering claims can't be brought in federal court. So South Carolina is essentially arguing, yes, we gerrymandered, but race and politics are so intertwined that we did this for partisan reasons, not because we hate Black people. And that is actually what's for the Supreme Court. That's what they're going to be deciding, is whether race and politics are too closely intertwined for racial gerrymandering claims to be brought in federal court. It's extremely disturbing, to say the least. On the environmental front, just 2 years ago, the Supreme Court absolutely decimated the Clean Air Act and said that the EPA doesn't have the authority to regulate power plant emissions. Huge case. Thought it couldn't get any worse for them to just railroad a 50-year cornerstone of environmental policy. Well, they came back the following year, just this June, and they issued an opinion gutting the Clean Water Act as well. Their decision in Sackett versus EPA threatens the clean drinking water of 117 million Americans and more than 50% of wetlands, which protect us from drought and from flooding. They're nature's sponges. This term, they're going to decide something called the Chevron doctrine, which is very, very legalese, but essentially what the Chevron doctrine has said for more than 40 years is that when Congress gives an agency the authority to do something, in this case because of scientific expertise, as long as the agency's interpretation of the law is reasonable, it should be given deference. If they overturn that, environmental policy is just up in the air. Like, it would be absolute chaos. On guns, a couple years ago, they got rid of a 100-year-old New York gun safety law. And this term, they are going to decide whether domestic abusers have the right to buy firearms, because there's currently a federal ban, and that's being challenged. On just the financial well-being of Americans, they have said that student loan forgiveness can't happen. And they're now hearing a case regarding the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and its funding source. And basically, the payday lending industry is saying that this regulatory body, because it's funded a little bit differently than other bodies, is fundamentally unconstitutional, and every regulation that they've ever issued should be thrown away. On civil rights and equity, they've ended affirmative action, and they have basically given businesses, corporations, the First Amendment right to put up signs saying, we don't serve gay people, people of color. Really, there's no limit to how the opinion is written. And these are just some of the issue areas that I find particularly compelling, problematic, and disturbing. How did we get here? That's the question that I feel like we sometimes lose sight of. And it really just comes down to two things. First and foremost, back in 2016, Senate Republicans broke all norms and refused to have that hearing for Merrick Garland. And then they pushed through Gorsuch at the first opportunity. They filled that seat. And then at the time, they said, of course, that it's because voters deserve a say in who serves on the Supreme Court. But that back in 2020, just a few years later, they confirmed Justice Amy Coney Barrett after 63 million people had voted in the election that unseated Donald Trump. Those ballots were already cast. Without those two illicit moves, we would currently have a 5-4 liberal majority. We would still have Roe v. Wade. We wouldn't be worried about these existential threats to rights and freedoms. But unfortunately, that's not the world that we live in. We live in a world where Democrats have won 7 out of the last 8 popular votes and yet have a minority on the Supreme Court. And we live in a world where the majority of Supreme Court justices have been appointed by a president that initially lost the popular vote. And as I said before, it's been 50 consecutive years of Republican control in the Supreme Court. Without expansion, it's expected that the Republican Party and one party control will continue until at least 2065, which means 42 more terms, like just the past few that we've seen. Amy Coney Barrett has only been on the court for 3 years. We've only had a 6-3 majority for 3 years, and this is the kind of hell that we've unleashed. So without bold reform like court expansion, that's going to continue for 42 more terms. And I can't even express how scary I find that. But fortunately, we have all of this momentum behind court expansion. We have more than 65 members of Congress already signed on to the bill, and so many are so close. And so what I want to talk to you a little bit today about the solutions is how you can get involved, how you can be involved as grassroots members in helping us get this across the finish line. Now, Supreme Court expansion is not going to happen tomorrow. We don't have a governing window. But as we've learned with filibuster reform, you have to start early and you have to build the momentum so that the votes are already secured before the window opens so that you can get things done when you have that governing window. So I'm not sure who's controlling the chat, but if someone could drop in the Google Doc that I sent, that would be fantastic. I've created just a little bit of a follow-up document where you can get involved. You can follow us by subscribing to our Substack, subscribing to our email list, or just learning more on our website. And then the other thing that would be really, really, really helpful is for you to make calls, particularly to Senator Padilla, but I've also listed the phone numbers of all Peninsula area House representatives. I called Senator Padilla today because it had been a while and I wrote a call script, so I figured why not? And it really and literally took me 1 minute and 30 seconds to get through. So if you have 1 minute and 30 seconds to care about this issue and to tell Senator Padilla, hey, get on this bill, we would really, really appreciate it, as well as the House reps in this area. You can also email them. I've put an email template as well and all the links to their individual email contact us buttons. And that is really the number one way that you can get involved. Because as Laura said, we are close. We are building momentum like we've never seen before. And we really want to get some of these senators that are very, very close and some of these representatives that are pretty close to supporting over that finish line. And calls are some of the best ways that you can do that. I want to make sure that I've left a little bit of time for questions. I know that we have a smaller group today, so hopefully I can get through quite a few, or at least one or two. But I hope that at least demonstrated that if you care about any major progressive issue, you care about court expansion, especially if you care about democracy and our institutions surviving.
Wow. I'm going to field some questions for you. This was fantastic.
Thank you.
There's
Barbara,
questions in the chat, okay?
Barbara, can
Yeah.
I'm gonna pull rank to ask the first question. So, but first of all, I want to say, Chelsey, that you've come to the right place. We will summarize your points. We will put them in our newsletter, which goes out to about 5,500 people, activists.
Thank you.
All over the country, not just in this area anymore. We've gone national, and we will share those actions with them. But Mike, could you just explain to us what would be required in the Senate, in particular, in the House? What kind of control do we need to have to actually, when we enter that governing window, be able to pass the legislation what is the mechanism that would?
So the great thing about court expansion is it doesn't require a constitutional amendment. Other reforms might. It's a little bit unclear, but court expansion or changing the size of the Supreme Court has been something that Congress has done over 7 times in our nation's history. It's something that has firm constitutional backing, even from an originalist perspective. Half of Mount Rushmore expanded the Supreme Court or changed the size of the Supreme Court. So it has very firm backing. So that's something that's really great. It can be passed by just simple and ordinary legislation. So we have the Judiciary Act of 2023 right now, which is really like a 3-line bill. It couldn't be simpler or more straightforward. And that just needs to pass the House and the Senate. So, depending on where we end up with the filibuster in the future, we either need just a simple majority in the Senate or a little bit more than a simple majority in the Senate. And of course, we need a president who will sign it into law.
So just to be clear, if we had enough votes in the Senate to reform the filibuster around this issue, around Supreme Court legislation, let's say,
51.
then you could pass this bill. So it's not the case that we need to get to 60 votes in the Senate. We just need to be able to reform the filibuster.
Yep.
Okay, Barbara, take it away.
Okay, so there's some questions in the chat, and one is from Judith. Do you think Roberts will ever support an ethical code for the Supreme Court?
No. I won't speculate around what certain people are going to do or vote for. But I think we've sort of seen already there be resistance to ethics reform from the Supreme Court itself. Samuel Alito just created his own little op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying that Congress has no authority to rein in the Supreme Court whatsoever, which is incredibly wild, given that it violates all principles of checks and balances and this idea of co-equal branches of government. It's really inflating the Supreme Court to a degree that was never intended, and is basically an autocratic level. Perhaps Roberts will support ethics reform at some point. He is a political actor. He's very, very scared of other court reforms, so it's possible that he could change his mind. But I think given how deliberate the Supreme Court theft was and how much money and how much effort went into stealing this court over a 50-year period, I don't think that the Supreme Court is ever likely to willingly cede its own power when it can overturn ethics legislation, when it can overturn term limits legislation at its own whim.
Okay, good. That's good to know. And how would the court expansion actually occur if it did happen?
Yeah, so the Judiciary Act would add 4 seats to the Supreme Court, and those seats could be filled as soon as the Senate confirms, and as soon as the president appoints, and as soon as the Senate confirms. So it's not exactly instant, but it's pretty much as instant as you can get in the American political system.
Okay, that's good.
Chelsey, could you explain why maybe you did already and I didn't hear it this time, but why you're looking at 4 seats?
Yeah. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but when 2 seats are stolen, you need 4 to make up for it. So if you think about where we would be without those 2 stolen seats, we'd be at a 5-4 narrow liberal majority. This would put us at a 7-6 narrow liberal majority. So it really is just rebalancing those 2 stolen seats, which is why we need the 4.
In addition, doesn't it have something to do with the number of circuits?
That is also a response that does compel some people to support court expansion. So before the Civil War, the number of Supreme Court seats was always tied to the number of federal circuits. It comes from a tradition of these justices actually riding circuit. That tradition, of course, died, but the idea that we could have one justice from each circuit court is another compelling reason to support court expansion and the number 13. Also, I think when it comes to things like ethics legislation and term limits, having a more, transparent, body that has public trust and having a fair appointment process, those things can only happen when you have a court that believes that it should be subject to oversight. And so court expansion, we look at as the first reform, the one that has to go through first to make everything else possible. So when it comes to these other reforms like ethics proposals and term limits proposals, we do endorse those ideas. We just really firmly think that political support needs to coalesce around court expansion first in order to enable those things in the future.
Okay, Mary B asks, how do you maximize the telephone impact? Because I'm ready to call.
Oh, can I just add, Barbara? May I just want to say, I did call once I learned about this. It's so exciting to listen to you, Chelsey. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I did call Kevin Mullen once because I'm a constituent of his, and he just replaced Jackie Spear. And I spoke to the intern, and the intern had no idea about this Judiciary Act of 2023, but showed a lot of interest. So naively, I thought, oh my goodness, well, I'm sure Kevin Mullen is going to sign on this right away and co-sponsor it. And of course he did not. So when I realized that I need to get more support locally of his constituents to make this happen. So I just and so do you agree with that? And I'm trying to figure out a way to do that. If it seems obvious that's what needs to be done to compel Mullen to co-sponsor.
Sure, sure. And thank you all for already doing that work. That's really amazing to hear that, this is an issue that you care about somewhat unprompted and that you're making these calls already. That's wonderful to hear. Sorry that his intern who picked up the phone hadn't heard about it. We are not a primarily grassroots organization. Like I said, we tend to focus on direct conversations with Congress, organizations and other actors, but there are several organizations that are more grassroots oriented that do this sort of filmmaking. So I will definitely try to put you in touch with one of those organizations that does that. I think the first and foremost important thing that you can be doing when you're talking to your representative and they haven't heard, the person who picks up the phone hasn't heard about it, is to, mention why it's important to you, mention the organizations that are really out in front, mention Hank Johnson is the primary lead in the House of Representatives, and just point them in the right direction. When it comes to the theory of change, it is very complicated to get those co-sponsors on board. But I think you're doing all the right things. You're making the calls, you're thinking about how you get other people involved. Please feel free to share this call script with your personal network, as well as more broadly. But I just want to thank you already for doing that work.
Maybe you could just, after this is over, just do a little script, like a couple sentences that you would say that when
I put together, so in that Google Doc that I circulated, I have a call script ready.
Oh, good.
For everyone. So you really can just read it off and have your phone on speakerphone.
Yeah, because, we're thinking, oh, what am I going to say? Okay. So
So the call script is there. There's an email script that you can also use to talk to your representative. Once again, I just want to emphasize that, please talk to your representatives, but if you only have time to make one call, Alex Padilla, please.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Laura, I think we're running out of time. Would you want to take over?
Yeah, let's wrap up the court conversation. Also in the Google Doc that's in the chat, you can sign up for the Take Back the Court Foundation email newsletter. You can sign up for their Substack to follow what they're doing. We'll also share this, Chelsey, with Jessica Craven's Chop Wood, Carry Water, which we were talking about at the beginning. She always
amazing. I love Jessica Craven. I follow her on TikTok, not her newsletter, but I'll sign up for her newsletter too.
Her newsletter, she always has every day she has another call you can make. So she, I'm sure, would add this to her list if she has never done it before, or even if she has. So I want to underscore what you said at the beginning about Eric Bilgin was his name, I think, and your original founder.
Oh, Aaron Belkin. Sorry.
Aaron Belkin, sorry. Okay.
I probably spoke too fast there.
No. I just wrote it down wrong. Who saw the writing on the wall that his life's work was going to be erased, right? Well, We're all in that same boat, right? Everything that we are working for and have worked for is subject to reversal by the Supreme Court. It's already happening, but it can be fixed. And it can be fixed by our electoral victories. Everything you see happening around you with the leadership of the Republican Party and Donald Trump being held to account, all of that's happening, as I've said before, because of the progress that we're making in bolstering our democracy. Fani Willis would not have been able to bring that case if all of the election deniers had won in 2022. It would have been very, very difficult. She would have been out there by herself. There wouldn't have been it wouldn't have been all the states rowing in the same direction, right? We did that. I mean, it's great that the Justice Department and the states and so forth are running those prosecutions, but that's power that we created. They needed power and we gave it to them. And we're in the same situation with the Supreme Court. We can get there. We need to just keep doing what we've been doing. We're making great progress. So Chelsey, thank you. That was really terrific.
Yes. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, I'm going to just quickly drop my email in the chat. You're welcome to email me personally, any of you. So thank you so much for having me.
Great. And then we have a tradition at the end. If anyone, the official meeting is over at 6:00. So you're not being rude if you sign off. But if anyone would like to talk about anything that we talked about earlier in the call or stuff you want to mention to the group, we just throw the floor open for anyone who wants to comment. So we'll do that now. Chelsey, you're also free to go. It would not be rude for you to sign off now.
I'll stay for a couple minutes.
So if you have anything you want to share, go ahead and unmute yourself.
So Blasey Ford is writing a book, right, Chelsey?
I'm
sorry, I was responding to you in the chat.
Blasey Ford, you know, the one that
Christine Blasey Ford, who testified.
Yes, of course.
You know that she's writing a book.
I haven't read it yet, but yes.
But it's not out yet.
Oh, perfect. Well, then I'm not even behind.
No. But I thought, wow, that's interesting. You know, that I just wanted to comment on that because I just read it today. I mean, I thought
I didn't know about that. Thanks for telling me. Get
out, you know, and get away. But now she's working on a book. So about the whole Kavanaugh thing.
I just remember it being an incredibly emotional testimony. Oh. So I'm really glad that she's doing that.
Yeah.
I was curious, is the Heritage Foundation kind of laying out the future for the court? Who is the court taking its directions from? Is it Leo Leonard? Is it? Yeah,
Leonard Leo.
Leo, yeah.
I will say that, you know, the Heritage Foundation has a lot of influence in dark money spaces and the Republican Party. I think that if you're going to name one primary actor in all of this, it's probably the Federalist Society, which is a right-wing group of legal operatives that have been pretty involved in the appointments process. They're rumored to, you know, have really influenced who Trump actually nominated. Yeah. They've been working on packing the lower courts for decades as well. They're part of why the Fifth Circuit is such an incredible mess. And they also have a really, in my opinion, outsized influence on the culture of law school campuses. So I went to a lot of protests. I'll just say that.
Is there any way is there any way to hamper?
Yeah. So one of the strategies for hampering the impact that the Federalist Society had on the U.S. court system was the creation of the American Constitution Society. That happened because of Bush v. Gore. Federalist Society had about a 20+ year head start on ACS's work. Okay. So I think that, you know, ACS is a phenomenal organization. They do good work on law school campuses as well. But the amount of influence that I think they have on the legal space is still not necessarily on par with the Federalist Society, especially how much money they're able to funnel into these groups. On the ethics front, it's just ridiculous where these Supreme Court justices are taking their money and their cues from. And I think we have every reason to suspect that in addition to the appearance of corruption, there's actual corruption going on. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything?
It was so thought-provoking. I mean, there's so much to do. There's so, you know, I mean,
I know, I'm so tired.
No. You know, we have this big mailing list of people, and this will strike some people as I'm going to make those 1-minute phone calls, you know.
Yes.
I mean, please do. It's so important. You know, there's been a number of meetings that we've taken, you know, with the coalition where the representatives say that they've received these unprompted calls and it matters so much to them. So, you know, really appreciate those who have already made the calls, really appreciate you all sharing it with your network. And the more calls that we can get going, the better.
And it doesn't take much time, and it doesn't need training. Yeah. You don't have to be, you know.
Yeah. And one of the good, I guess, one piece of good news for California especially is that in the upcoming Senate race, unless there's some sort of big upset, all three of the candidates, the major candidates, have already come out in favor of court expansion. So the next California senator will be an advocate for court expansion, almost certainly, unless there's a big upset. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now we just need to make sure there's this Democratic majority in the Senate.
The problem is they had to give up their seats in the House in order to run for Senate, and they're all good Congress people who are running
Yeah.
for the Senate seat. It's just
That's true. We will miss two of them no matter what happens. So, yeah, great point. Hopefully those districts stay where they have been politically.
Yes.
right.
Okay, I'm going to call a halt. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Laura, for having me.
Thanks, Chelsea.